It was an ordinary morning for everyone, except Vanessa. She walked into the bank dressed in plain running clothes, hoodie, track pants, joggers dusty from a long walk. Her hair was tied back carelessly, and a worn-out folder was clutched in her hands. Nobody gave her a second glance, except to judge her. The receptionist looked up, smiled with that polite stiffness reserved for people they didn't expect much from. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about an account. There's been some confusion," she said gently. Within minutes, she found herself sitting across from 3 senior executives, men in custom-tailored suits with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They scanned her clothes, then the folder, laughed lightly. "You believe you're the co-owner of this account?" one of them asked, spinning his tablet toward her. "Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" Another executive leaned back in his chair, clearly amused. "Usually, billionaires don't show up in running shoes." Their laughter was soft but sharp, the kind that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. But Vanessa didn't flinch. She sat still, her eyes steady, her hands calm. There was no anger, no embarrassment, just a quiet strength that made them uneasy without knowing why. "I'm not here for your approval," she said softly. "I'm here for the truth." And then, without warning, the atmosphere began to shift. The head of security got a sudden call. His face changed. The receptionist stood abruptly, whispering something to her supervisor. A luxury car pulled up outside, one that every banker in that building recognized, the kind only a few clients in the world used. In moments, the bank's regional manager came rushing down from his office, flustered and nervous. He didn't glance at the executives. He didn't ask questions. He walked straight to Vanessa and offered her his hand. "Mrs. Thompson, we deeply apologize. Your husband just called ahead. He's on his way." And just like that, everything changed. Nestled between the rolling hills and endless pine trees, the small town of Oak Ridge woke slowly each morning, like a cozy memory you never wanted to end. And every morning, right as the sun stretched its first golden fingers across the rooftops, Vanessa Mitchell could be seen jogging through the quiet streets. She wasn't fast, and she didn't wear fancy gear, just an old hoodie, some well-worn sneakers, and that gentle smile she offered to everyone she passed. The mailman, the school kids, old Mr. Corman on his porch with his morning paper, all waved, and she always waved back. At 55, Vanessa was the heart of Oak Ridge. She volunteered twice a week at the local library, helped organize the spring fair, and somehow never forgot a single birthday, dropping off banana bread or handwritten cards that always seemed to arrive exactly when someone needed them most. But that morning, something changed. As she jogged past the community park, her eyes caught a notice pinned to the bulletin board near the swings. It was flapping gently in the breeze. She slowed, then stopped. Her heart sank as she read the bold letters, "Notice of Permanent Closure, Oak Ridge Community Bank." She stood still for a long moment, reading it again just to be sure. That little bank had been part of the town for decades. It was where newlyweds opened their first joint account, where kids lined up with their piggy banks, and where the manager still knew your name when you walked in the door. Vanessa's hand instinctively moved to the folder tucked under her arm, a habit now. That folder held more than just papers. It held history. And though no one in Oak Ridge really knew, Vanessa's life wasn't quite what it seemed. She had always chosen simplicity, humility. People saw her as the kind neighbor, the helper, but few ever wondered about the past she never talked about, or the quiet power she carried behind her smile. Because Vanessa Mitchell wasn't just a woman who remembered birthdays. She was the silent keeper of a fortune. The wife of a man whose name stirred boardrooms and headlines, a man who chose peace and privacy with her in the quiet corners of Oak Ridge. And now, as she stood in front of that notice, something inside her stirred. It was time to stop being silent. Oak Ridge was the kind of town where everyone still said good morning, where the barista at the local cafe added an extra dash of cinnamon if she knew it was your birthday, where the past wasn't just history, it was shared. At the center of it all stood the Oak Ridge Community Bank. It didn't look like much to outsiders. A modest brick building with a single ATM and a chime that rang every time the door opened. But to the people of Oak Ridge, it was more than a bank. It was a place of trust. It was where Alan Brooks brought his daughter to open her first savings account at age 7, after she won a spelling bee and saved her prize money. Where Dolores King, now 83, came every week with a handwritten deposit slip and a tin of cookies for the tellers. Where newly married Emma and Josh had sat with a loan officer just last year, their hands tightly clasped as they applied for a mortgage on their fixer-upper cottage. So when a closure notice went up, it felt like someone had punched a hole straight through the heart of Oak Ridge. "I don't understand," Sam Torres said as he stared at the notice in disbelief. "We've always supported this bank. Why now?" His restaurant, the pride of Main Street, had been built with help from this very place. Around town, people started to worry, not just about the inconvenience, but about what this said about their worth, about whether the world still had space for small towns like Oak Ridge. Vanessa heard every whisper, and while she never said much in public, her silence wasn't passive. It was reflective. She knew what it meant to be told no before even being heard. Years ago, before anyone knew her name, she had sat across a bank desk with a folder of her own, dreams of opening a bookstore. A small one, filled with used books, plants, soft music. The kind of place where lonely hearts could come and not feel alone. But the man she met didn't even open the folder. He saw a young woman in worn jeans, no big-name investors, and told her the market was too competitive, that she should think smaller. She never forgot the sound of that rejection. Not just the words, the tone, the way it shrunk her, made her doubt herself, just long enough to bury the dream. And yet, here she was again, this time older, wiser, still holding a folder. But she wasn't walking in with a dream. She was walking in with facts. When she stepped into Oak Ridge Community Bank that Friday morning, she didn't care how people looked at her. She knew she didn't fit the image, no briefcase, no high heels, no expensive jewelry. But she walked in anyway. As she crossed the lobby, people turned. Some recognized her, not as anyone important, just as the woman who helped clean the church garden or ran the story time at the library. But the staff? They didn't see that. One teller leaned toward another and whispered, "What's she doing here?" Vanessa walked up to the front desk and calmly asked to speak with someone regarding account ownership and institutional shares. The receptionist blinked, caught off guard. I'll get the manager." When Patricia came out, her body language said everything. Arms folded, brow tight, eyes sharp. Her greeting was coldly professional. Vanessa offered her name and explained that she had information and a query regarding the bank's ownership transition. She held out the folder, a thick one, neatly labeled. Patricia didn't take it. Instead, she smiled tightly. "Our regional director is handling that. He's only available by appointment, but I suppose I could see if he's free." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Like Vanessa had wandered into a place she didn't belong. Minutes later, James arrived. Tall, crisp suit, gold watch. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't offer a seat. He just looked at her, and then at the folder, and made a decision in his head. "I'm not sure how you came by this information, ma'am," he said, glancing at her clothes again. "But this is a sensitive matter. Our corporate restructuring is private and handled by vetted stakeholders." He didn't even try to hide it. He thought she was confused, or worse, delusional. "I'm not here by accident," Vanessa replied calmly. "I'm here because I have every right to be." James gave a short laugh. "Well, unless you're part of the acquiring board or a private equity firm, I'm afraid we can't help you." "No," she said, "but I am a 50% owner of the largest holding company involved in this merger. You might want to check again." Patricia stiffened. James blinked, just for a second, but he didn't check. He didn't verify. He just smiled again. That condescending, airtight smile that said, "I've already decided who you are. Well, we'll be in touch, if necessary." They thought it was over. They thought she would leave, embarrassed, flustered, defeated. But Vanessa stood still for a moment longer, watching them. She said only one thing before turning to go. "You judged me before you asked my name. That was your first mistake." She left the folder on the desk and walked out. Behind her, silence hung heavy in the air. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that a phone call was already being made. A man with more wealth than the entire institution had quietly paused his meeting in Tokyo to take that call. A man whose influence spanned continents but chose to live in quiet, with a woman who never needed to boast. Her husband, her partner, the one who once built empires and now trusted her with his legacy. And in less than 24 hours, Oak Ridge Bank would be reminded of a truth many forget. Power doesn't always wear a suit, and the quiet ones are often the ones you should never underestimate. The next morning, the air in Oak Ridge was still. The usual buzz of the town seemed quieter, like it was holding its breath. Inside the Oak Ridge Community Bank, the tension from the previous day had dissolved into smug satisfaction. Patricia walked the lobby with a clipboard in hand and a knowing smirk on her face. James stood at the reception counter, chatting lightly, confident in the belief that the matter had been dealt with, that the strange woman in jogging clothes had been put in her place. They were laughing, lightly, not cruelly, but certainly carelessly. That is, until the glass doors slid open once again. The laughter faded. In walked a tall man in a tailored charcoal gray suit, every inch of him composed, confident, but not flashy. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his expression unreadable. He carried no briefcase, no security detail, no introduction, just presence. The kind that made people stand straighter without knowing why. He stepped forward with calm purpose. Behind him, Vanessa walked in, same joggers, same hoodie, same steady pace. But this time her eyes weren't searching, they were certain. Patricia's clipboard slipped a little in her hands. James straightened his tie. The man didn't hesitate. He walked directly to the front of the lobby, where both executives stood, now frozen in place. His voice was low, even, but it filled the space like thunder. "I understand you've been speaking with my wife about acquiring this institution." Silence. James's mouth opened, then closed. Patricia's face went pale. For a moment, no one moved. A pin could have dropped and echoed like a gunshot. Then, slowly, Richard Mitchell turned to Vanessa, gently, with pride. The look between them said everything: partnership, love, and a deep, unshakable respect. And then he faced James again. "Would it have changed how you treated her if you had known her last name?" James swallowed hard. Behind the counters, the tellers stopped pretending to work. Even the customers in the waiting area leaned forward, sensing something monumental unfolding. Vanessa stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but it didn't need to be loud. It carried something greater: clarity. "I didn't come here to be recognized. I came because communities like Oak Ridge need institutions that see people as more than just numbers. I came as a neighbor, a stakeholder, a woman who remembers what it's like to be dismissed without being heard." She turned to Patricia. "Yesterday, you looked at my clothes and decided I wasn't worth your time, but every single one of your customers out there, they wear the same shoes I do, and if you can't see them, you don't deserve to serve them." Patricia opened her mouth, but no words came. James took a step forward, his tone suddenly humble. "Mr. Mitchell, if we had known—" But Richard held up a hand, calm, controlled. "You didn't know, and that's exactly the problem." He paused, looked around the room, then added with finality, "Effective immediately, Vanessa will be leading the transition team for this acquisition. She'll decide who stays." It was done. No shouting, no slamming fists, just truth. spoken by the very people they underestimated. Patricia's clipboard slipped to the floor. James took a step back, his face blank with disbelief. And Vanessa? She simply turned and walked toward the offices at the back, staff parting like water as she passed. For the first time, they saw her, not just as a woman in running shoes, but as someone who saw clearly, listened deeply, and led quietly, with more power than any of them could have imagined. That day, the Oak Ridge Community Bank didn't just gain a new owner, it found its heart again. The sun had shifted by the time Vanessa and Richard stepped out of the bank. It was quieter now, not because nothing was happening, but because something had. Behind them, the staff inside were no longer whispering. They were watching, processing, rethinking. At the door, a soft voice called out. It was Nancy, one of the younger employees. She had stayed quiet the entire time, uncertain where she stood, but now she stepped forward with purpose. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said gently, "thank you for not walking away." Vanessa smiled. Not the kind that says "I told you so," but the kind that says "I see you now, and I hope you see yourself too." She nodded once. Oak Ridge is worth fighting for. As Vanessa and Richard made their way down the steps, hand in hand, life resumed. But something had changed. Back inside, Mrs. Henderson was at her usual window, chatting with a teller who suddenly listened with more patience. Sam Torres dropped by that afternoon with warm empanadas, not out of obligation, but gratitude. And the sign outside the bank? It stayed. But now it bore a new plaque beneath, "Community First." Narration gently fades in, carried by soft music. Vanessa and Richard didn't just save the bank, they reminded everyone of a simple truth. Dignity isn't defined by clothes or by numbers in an account. In a world that too often rushes to judge, they proved that character, compassion, and courage still matter most. Cut to Vanessa sitting at her usual bench by the park, tying her running shoes. Kids laugh in the background. Life goes on, stronger, more connected. Vanessa's voice closes the story. "The way you treated me that day is exactly why institutions fail the people they claim to serve. But this one, we're going to rebuild it with open doors, open minds, and open hearts." Fade out to a final message on screen. Every community deserves to be seen, to be heard, to be believed. Share this story if you believe in dignity beyond appearances. After that day, it wasn't just the Oak Ridge Community Bank that changed. The way people saw each other did too. Vanessa and Richard didn't just acquire an institution, they shifted a mindset. That respect isn't something you earn by wearing a suit or flashing a card. It's something every human deserves, no matter what they look like, where they come from, or what name they carry. Vanessa brought new faces into the bank and awakened something in the old ones too. Every customer who walked through the doors was greeted with sincerity, not suspicion. Mrs. Henderson still came every Friday. Sam Torres grew his restaurant into a chain and opened a second branch. Mitchell's Way, he called it. And Nancy, the quiet bank employee who stepped up when it mattered, she became assistant manager within the year. As for Vanessa, she continued her morning jogs through Oak Ridge. Nothing changed about her pace, her clothes, or her smile. Only now every wave she received held something deeper: recognition, gratitude, and quiet admiration. The town never forgot the day a woman in running shoes reminded them what real wealth looks like. Not in dollars, but in dignity. And the sign outside the bank still says, Oak Ridge Community Bank, Community First. Because some stories don't just end, they echo.